It's certainly a pleasure to be here today talking about the 2020 growing season, my contribution to eFields here for AgTech Tuesday. Certainly, 2020 had some memorable moments and memorable periods. We're going to talk a little bit about that today to help you kind of put a close to 2020 and also thinking about getting started here in 2021. I can't believe it's February already. We've been pretty dry, fairly warm as well this winter. Things are starting to get a little more active over the last week or two, and we think that's going to continue as well. But I'll save that for the end of the presentation today, and we'll focus first on last year. So if I were to ask you to describe the weather of 2020, I think I'd get a lot of different answers. I think some would talk about perhaps it was perfect season or average season. I think some of you would remark that it was hot or cold, maybe during different parts of the year. That certainly was the case. And dry and wet, certainly depending on where you are or where you were and are located in Ohio. And I would argue we've seen, all of the above here for 2020. And so I want to break that down a little bit and kind of reflect on some of those conditions that we saw last year. So if we look at our temperatures for 2020, it was actually the 7th warmest year on record for Ohio, going back 126 years, back to 1895. So very warm conditions. And what I'm showing you here are the differences compared to average, which we reflect as 1981 to 2010 currently. And we're looking at our average highs on the left. So that's the average of the daily high and low. And then showing you the differences compared to the long-term mean of daily highs in the middle and overnight lows on the right-hand side. So warm pretty much across the state. I would say definitely in the averages and in the overnight lows. We know that our overnight lows really have seen more warming than our daytime highs. And that really was the case for 2020 as well, as they were slightly closer to average for the southern half of the state during the year of 2020. But again, 7th warmest year on record in the last 126 years. There were certainly seasonal differences that do play into the conditions that we saw last year. We had a very warm March, 11th warmest on record, and then a cold April and May. Climatologically, that kind of washes out to an average spring, but we know those details really matter. And then as we got into the summer, we dried out quite a bit, and we had a very warm summer, a very warm July in particular, and those warm conditions continued throughout our fall and harvest season as well. So with that cold in April and May, we had frequent freezes, periods below freezing here well into May. This is a figure from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center showing the late season freeze events across our region. So much of Southwest Ohio, that date fell between May 1st and May 10th. For much of us across Ohio, it was actually after the 11th, 13th, I think 15th in some locations, seeing our last freeze of the season. So a little bit different than we've seen over the last couple of years with these late freezes well into May this year. Now looking at precipitation for the year, it was our 29th wettest year on record for Ohio. Some of you, especially up there in the Northwest, are thinking, how could it be in the top 30 wettest? Certainly, if we look at the amount of rainfall on the left-hand side, much of Ohio picked up between 40 and 50 inches of precipitation for the year. The winter was close to Cleveland with about 58 inches of precipitation. But you just had to go over to the northwest corner where many folks over there saw about 25 to 30 inches of precipitation for the year. So running deficits on the order of 3 to even 9 inches of precipitation below average last year. So very dry up there, but fairly wet for the remainder of the state. And it was really a tale of two different seasons here. We went from a wet spring, again, this wet, cold spring, especially in March, 15th wettest March, 17th wettest spring, to a very dry summer, 29th driest on record. Again, 126-year record here, especially in June and July. And then we had some, more moisture around during the month of August, potentially helping out some of those yields, but also potentially leading to some of the disease issues, the toxin issues that we saw across the state as well. Of course, we had some drought with those dry, warm conditions. This was the height of the drought here. We're talking 37% of the state covered by moderate drought conditions, the beige color there on the right-hand side. Across their northern, northwestern, north central counties, down the Bellefontaine Ridge, and then parts of south central Ohio as well, Pickaway County in particular. And this photo from Hardin County, from Mark Botticher here in Hardin County, just kind of tells the tale there in July of those very dry and hot conditions there across this portion of the state. So if we look at our top 10 wettest and our top 10 warmest years, they've all occurred, or 8 of them, sorry, 8 of the top 10 wettest and warmest have all occurred since 1990. So there's no doubt that we're farming in a warmer and a wetter environment these days. Even with the drought, or even with the wet conditions, we're still seeing these mid-growing season drought. They can be short-lived and intense, but also with the extreme rainfall that we're seeing, the extreme precipitation downpours as well. All of this tied to our overall changing weather patterns. Now, with the warmer conditions, there could be some opportunities, especially when we think about growing season length. We know, for instance, and this is an example from Fulton County, that we've extended our growing season by about 10 to even 20 days, depending on where you are in the state. So a lot of that, more of that is coming into an extended fall season where we don't see that first freeze as soon as, or as early as we did back in the 70s and the 80s, for instance. And even our last spring freeze is getting earlier in the season as well. Now, 2020 bucked those trends just a little bit, but again, they're well within the trend that we've seen overall since 1970. Now, with our rainfall, seeing more rainfall, more intense rainfall, especially winter into spring, we've seen a decline, continued decline in our suitable fieldwork days during the month of April and October, highlighted here by the blue and the orange curves, and that's since the mid-1990s. So a lot of us perhaps are thinking about other windows, or how can we get into our fields in the springtime with the wet conditions. Certainly, if you look at May, it's been fairly flat. So you know, plenty of opportunities here, perhaps depending on how wet it is in May, obviously. But even if we're thinking getting in later, you know, if that's your plan or your decision making, our suitable fieldwork days are increasing during the month of June with extended falls. This might afford us a little bit of a window. Certainly, it's not every year that we see late freezes, even though that's the trend. So all of this obviously has to go into those hard decisions that you have to make. I just have to talk about the weather. So I have it easy there. All right, so to wrap up today, I do want to give you a little outlook. It does look like our pattern has picked up quite a bit. So we're looking at above average temperatures, I think, as we head through the month of February, with a good chance of seeing above average precipitation as well. And I expect that to continue throughout our planting season. I think we're going to moisten up first. We've got plenty of capacity to pull in some moisture right now with dry soils, especially across northwestern Ohio. But eventually they're going to be pretty saturated, I think, as we get to March and April. And this is likely to continue into the month of May. So just a kind of an early heads up on our planting season here. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. You can always reach out to me at wilson.1010@osu.edu. Love talking about weather and climate anytime.